In a quiet suburban neighborhood of Houston, Texas, an unspeakable tragedy was about to unfold, one that would leave the community in shock and horror. Jennifer and Charlie, a seemingly ordinary couple, lived together with their 18-year-old daughter Melissa. Jennifer, 34 years old and known for her striking looks, spent her days as a housewife, while her husband Charlie, 39, worked long hours as an accountant. The couple appeared to have a perfect life, but behind closed doors, secrets were brewing, ones that would lead to deadly consequences. Living just across the street was Fred, a 29-year-old Nigerian-born forester. Muscular, strong, and charismatic, Fred often caught the eye of Jennifer, who found herself drawn to him. Her husband's long working hours left Jennifer feeling lonely, and it wasn't long before she started to take notice of Fred's physique and charm. Fred, aware of Jennifer's lingering glances, soon realized the power he had over her. Jennifer began dressing provocatively short skirts, low-cut tops, and would make sure Fred saw her every chance she got. It was a game of seduction, and eventually the attraction became too strong to resist. Jennifer and Fred embarked on a torrid affair that lasted for months. Almost every day, while Charlie was away at work, Jennifer and Fred would spend hours together, tangled in a secret web of lust and deceit. The affair grew bolder by the day, with the pair meeting for long sessions at Fred's home, just a few feet away from where her daughter and husband slept. For 4 months, their relationship went unnoticed. But Charlie began to grow suspicious. One night, as he tried to rekindle the romance with Jennifer, she pushed him away. That's when Charlie noticed something odd, small bruises on her body that he couldn't explain. Jennifer brushed them off, claiming they were nothing, but the seeds of doubt were already planted in Charlie's mind. He tried to track Jennifer's movements, but his demanding work schedule made it difficult to keep tabs on her during the day. Still, the strange behavior continued, and Charlie knew something was wrong. He just couldn't prove it. Then, one day, everything changed. Fred had finished work early, returning home before his usual time. Meanwhile, Melissa, Jennifer, and Charlie's daughter, had come home early from school and found herself locked out of the house. Her parents were out running errands, and she had no way of getting inside. Fred, seeing Melissa standing helplessly in front of her house, offered to help. He invited her into his home, saying she could wait there until her parents returned. Unsuspecting, Melissa accepted. Inside Fred's home, things took a sinister turn. Fred offered Melissa a glass of water, but what she didn't know was that he had laced it with a sedative. Within minutes, Melissa began to feel dizzy and weak, and soon after, she collapsed unconscious. Fred carried her to his bedroom, where he committed an unspeakable crime. He raped her while she lay defenseless. When Melissa finally woke up, groggy and confused, she found herself lying naked in Fred's bed. Realizing what had happened, she screamed in terror, her cries piercing the silence of the house. But Fred, desperate to silence her, grabbed the nearest object, a heavy axe he used for his forestry work. In a fit of panic, Fred swung the axe down, striking Melissa and ending her life in one brutal blow. Blood splattered across the room, and Fred stood there, panting, the weight of his crime sinking in. But it wasn't over yet. Realizing that Jennifer and Charlie would return soon, Fred knew he couldn't let them find out what he had done. His mind raced with panic and fear, but a dark resolve began to form. He decided there was only one way out. He had to eliminate them too. Fred stood in the quiet aftermath of his brutal crime, his hands trembling as he stared down at Melissa's lifeless body. He knew there was no turning back now. His mind was clouded with fear, but also with the cold realization that the only way to escape this would be to kill Jennifer and Charlie when they returned home. It wasn't long before Jennifer and Charlie arrived back from their errands. They walked into the house, completely unaware of the horror that had just taken place across the street. Fred watched from his window, gripping the axe tightly as he prepared for what he had to do next. He waited until the sun had fully set, the darkness covering the quiet suburban street like a blanket. A storm was beginning to brew outside. The wind howled, and distant rumbles of thunder echoed across the neighborhood. As the night deepened, the power went out, a blackout caused by the fierce storm. The timing couldn't have been worse for Jennifer and Charlie. Fred moved quickly, slipping out of his house and across the yard. The darkness hid his presence as he made his way to their home. He quietly entered through the back door, which Jennifer had forgotten to lock in her rush to unload the groceries. Inside, the house was silent, except for the soft patter of rain against the windows. Jennifer was in the kitchen, lighting candles due to the blackout, unaware that Fred was lurking in the shadows. As she turned her back to the door, Fred approached silently. With one swift, calculated movement, he swung the axe down, catching Jennifer off guard. She barely had time to react before she fell to the ground, the light of the candles flickering over the gruesome scene. Fred felt a twisted sense of resolve wash over him as he turned his attention to Charlie, who was upstairs in his home office, still working late into the night. Fred crept up the staircase, each step carefully measured, as the storm outside grew fiercer, masking any sounds he made. He could hear the faint clicking of Charlie's keyboard as he worked, completely oblivious to the terror that had just unfolded downstairs. Fred stepped into the room, his axe gripped tightly in his hand. As Charlie finally noticed him, it was too late. Fred brought the axe down with terrifying force. Charlie tried to fight back, but Fred's rage, fueled by his desperation, was overpowering. Within moments, it was over. Charlie lay lifeless on the floor, next to his desk. With both Jennifer and Charlie dead, Fred's panic began to subside, replaced by the chilling realization that he had just wiped out an entire family. He knew the police would be coming for him soon, but he wasn't ready to face the consequences. Grabbing his axe, Fred fled into the stormy night, disappearing into the dense woods near the edge of the neighborhood. For days, Fred was a fugitive. The police quickly discovered the grisly scene inside Jennifer and Charlie's home, as well as Melissa's body in Fred's bedroom. The neighborhood was thrown into chaos as news spread of the horrifying murders. Search teams scoured the nearby forest, but Fred knew how to hide. He had spent years working in the wilderness as a forester, and he used his knowledge to evade capture. Fred lived in the woods, moving from one remote area to another, always staying one step ahead of the authorities. But the net was closing in. The police found evidence of Fred's whereabouts: a discarded shirt, traces of blood, and slowly but surely, they began to narrow their search. After weeks on the run, Fred's luck finally ran out. A team of officers tracked him to an abandoned cabin deep in the woods. Fred, realizing he was cornered, tried to fight his way out, but it was no use. In a final standoff, Fred charged at the officers with his axe, but he was gunned down before he could strike. His reign of terror was over. The neighborhood would never be the same. The once quiet, peaceful street in Houston was now marked by the memory of an unimaginable tragedy, one that no one could have predicted. The murders of Jennifer, Charlie, and Melissa sent shockwaves through the community, leaving behind a trail of grief, horror, and unanswered questions. Fred's story became infamous, the tale of a man driven by lust and desperation to commit unspeakable acts, and the deadly consequences of secrets kept hidden for too long. Fred's death brought an end to the immediate terror, but the aftermath left scars that would take years to heal. In the days following the standoff, investigators pieced together the tragic events that led to the brutal murders. The neighborhood, once a symbol of suburban peace, became the backdrop for a dark chapter in Houston's history. The media swarmed the area, dubbing Fred the Axe Killer of Houston, and the story captivated the nation. News outlets detailed how a once respected forester had descended into madness, driven by a twisted affair with his neighbor's wife and a horrific act of violence against their daughter. The investigation revealed more than just Fred's rage-fueled attack. Detectives uncovered Jennifer's secret relationship with Fred, which had lasted for months under Charlie's nose. Neighbors had noticed Jennifer's flirtatious behavior, but no one suspected how far things had gone. Jennifer's friends were shocked to learn that she had been involved with Fred, a man who they barely knew outside of his quiet, solitary life as a forester. For Charlie, the signs had been there. The bruises, Jennifer's distant behavior, the late nights where she claimed exhaustion, it all made sense now. He had been too focused on his work to see what was happening right in front of him. His friends and colleagues would later reflect on how he had seemed tired, even stressed, in the weeks leading up to his murder, but no one could have imagined the secret life his wife was leading. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Fred's crime spree had been meticulously planned after his brutal assault on Melissa. After drugging her and committing the unspeakable act, Fred panicked when she began to scream, forcing him to take the ultimate step to silence her forever. From there, he knew there was no turning back. The moment he picked up the axe, he sealed his fate. In the weeks following the murders, Houston was gripped with fear and disbelief. How could such horrific events unfold in a seemingly safe, ordinary neighborhood? Reporters interviewed neighbors, friends, and family, all trying to make sense of what had happened. The local police department held multiple press conferences, detailing the extensive search for Fred and the tragic conclusion to his reign of terror. Even though Fred had been killed by police, questions lingered. Could anyone have prevented this? Were there signs of Fred's instability that had been ignored? And most hauntingly, how had Jennifer's choices set in motion such a violent chain of events? The Engel family, distant relatives of Charlie and Jennifer, expressed their grief publicly, describing the unbearable pain of losing not only Charlie and Jennifer, but Melissa, an innocent girl caught in the middle of an unspeakable crime. They called for the community to heal and move forward, but the trauma would take time to fade. As time passed, the houses on that once peaceful street in Houston remained haunted by the memory of Fred's crime. Neighbors moved away, unable to bear living in the shadow of such horror. For those who stayed, the sight of Fred's house, now abandoned and boarded up, served as a chilling reminder of how quickly life could turn from normal to nightmarish. The story of Fred, Jennifer, Charlie, and Melissa would be told for years, a tragic tale of infidelity, betrayal, and murder that shocked not only Houston but the entire country. The once ordinary neighborhood would forever be linked to the bloody events that unfolded during that stormy night, and the legacy of Fred's madness would never be forgotten. In the months following the murders, the neighborhood slowly began to heal, but the scars left by Fred's rampage were deep. The media attention eventually faded, and the abandoned homes stood as grim reminders of the tragedy that had unfolded. Investigators wrapped up their case, but many in the community remained haunted by questions that would never fully be answered. Jennifer's friends struggled with their grief and confusion, trying to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the one who had engaged in a dangerous affair. Some whispered that Jennifer had been manipulated by Fred, while others believed that her actions had played a pivotal role in the violent outcome. The truth was likely somewhere in between, a toxic combination of lust, betrayal, and deceit that spiraled out of control. Charlie's colleagues at his accounting firm were similarly shaken. Many of them had worked closely with him for years, and the idea that someone as stable and grounded as Charlie could be pulled into such a deadly web of secrets left them feeling vulnerable. His funeral was a somber affair, attended by those who had known him best, but even in death, his story was overshadowed by the lurid details of the affair that had led to his murder. The Engel family, now in charge of settling the estate, had to sort through the remains of the lives that had been so violently cut short. They sold the house, unable to bear the memories that lingered in every corner. Fred's house, too, was sold at auction, though many in the neighborhood believed it should have been demolished. The new owners painted over the walls and replaced the floors, trying to erase the evidence of the brutal murders, but the shadow of Fred's actions would always hang over the property. As for Fred, his name became synonymous with horror. Years later, true crime podcasts, books, and documentaries would pick apart the story, dissecting every detail of his life and the events that led him to murder. Psychological profiles were drawn up, attempting to explain how a seemingly normal man could commit such heinous acts. But for those who lived through the terror, no explanation was sufficient. The Houston police, praised for their swift action in tracking Fred down, remained tight-lipped about the final moments of the standoff. Some officers privately admitted that Fred's death was a relief, a way to bring an end to the nightmare, but others wondered if more could have been done to prevent the loss of life. Had there been warning signs missed? Could Fred have been stopped before his violent outburst? For years, the story of Jennifer, Charlie, and Melissa Engel, and their tragic entanglement with Fred, would be remembered as one of Houston's most chilling crimes. It was a tale that exposed the darkest sides of human nature: lust, betrayal, and unbridled violence. Houston, Texas, once known for its quiet suburban neighborhoods and close-knit communities, now harbored a dark stain that would not fade with time. Fred, the man who had butchered his neighbors, left a legacy of bloodshed and heartbreak in his wake, one that would ripple far beyond the houses he haunted with his presence. The crime scene in this typically peaceful community was beyond disturbing. The once pristine home of Charlie and Jennifer, where neighbors had gathered for barbecues and the sounds of children's laughter had filled the air, had become the site of unimaginable horrors. The three bodies of the Engel family lay scattered across the house like twisted remnants of what once was a loving family. Their dreams and aspirations died that night with them. Fred's violent spree had ended only when law enforcement finally closed in on him. After days of tracking him through the dense woods and forests around the outskirts of Houston, the search had been grueling for both the authorities and the town. Fred, the once quiet and seemingly harmless man, had become the embodiment of a primal savagery that no one had seen coming. Yet the anger that boiled within him had been simmering for years, as investigators would later discover. He harbored a deep-seated resentment toward the life he saw from across the street. It wasn't just about Jennifer, it was about everything she and her family represented: wealth, stability, and a life he could never have. Jennifer had been the spark that set his dark desires aflame. Their illicit affair was an escape for both of them, though it quickly became something far more sinister. For Jennifer, Fred offered a dangerous thrill, a secret world away from the responsibilities of her home and her husband Charlie, whose long hours and emotional absence left her craving something more. For Fred, however, Jennifer represented something much darker. She became an object of obsession, a symbol of all the things he believed he was owed. Their affair had begun innocently enough: a few stolen glances over the garden fence, a brush of hands as they helped each other with chores. But soon it became clear that Jennifer was drawn to Fred's raw masculinity, and Fred, always the predator, knew exactly how to manipulate her desire. Their trysts, hidden from the prying eyes of the neighborhood, became the focal point of Fred's life. He waited, he planned, and he obsessed over her. And when the relationship turned from physical into something far more emotionally charged, Fred's perception began to warp. In his mind, Jennifer was no longer just an object of lust, but a possession, something that belonged to him and him alone. The weekends, the hours spent in passion, were enough to keep Fred satiated for a time. But as the weeks dragged on and his obsession deepened, Fred started to become possessive. Jennifer, however, viewed Fred as nothing more than a side fling. Charlie, despite his inattentiveness and constant work commitments, was still the man she wanted to keep her stability. She saw Fred as an escape, a temporary reprieve from the monotony of her daily life. Fred, on the other hand, began to see Jennifer's actions as betrayal. When Jennifer pulled away from Fred after months of their secret meetings, everything began to unravel. She started to feel the weight of her infidelity, and the guilt gnawed at her. Her daughter, Melissa, was growing up, and Jennifer feared what might happen if she got caught. Fred sensed the shift in her demeanor: the fewer calls, the shorter texts, and the excuses. Fred, paranoid and spiraling, began to imagine scenarios where Jennifer was with Charlie again, or worse, with someone else. His jealousy consumed him. But the true breaking point for Fred came when Melissa unwittingly stepped into his path. When Melissa showed up unexpectedly at his door that day, she had no idea she was walking straight into the lion's den. To Fred, Melissa was an extension of Jennifer, and when he drugged and assaulted her, it wasn't just an act of perverse lust. It was a way to exert control over Jennifer, to punish her for daring to pull away. The moment Fred took Melissa's life with the axe, the facade of the man he had once been, the neighbor, the friendly handyman, was gone. In his mind, the only thing left was destruction. He could not allow Jennifer and Charlie to live after what had transpired. He imagined Jennifer's betrayal, her rejection, as a direct attack on him, something he had to repay in blood. As Jennifer and Charlie returned from their shopping trip that stormy evening, completely unaware of the horror that awaited them, Fred was already in their house, lurking in the shadows. The storm that raged outside seemed to mirror the fury inside Fred as he waited for the right moment. The power had gone out in the neighborhood, the perfect cover for Fred's deadly ambush. Charlie entered the house first, calling out for Melissa, unaware that the last time he would speak his daughter's name would be in vain. The lights flickered for a brief moment, just long enough for Charlie to see Fred standing in the darkened hallway, holding the bloodied axe. Fred wasted no time. He swung the axe with savage precision, striking Charlie down before Jennifer could even scream. The house filled with the sound of thunder as Fred turned his attention to Jennifer. She was paralyzed with fear, backing away slowly, her mind unable to comprehend what was happening. This man, this lover who had once been her escape, had turned into her executioner. Jennifer tried to run, but Fred was faster, stronger, driven by a rage that could not be quelled. He struck her down with the same methodical violence, each blow a twisted release of his pent-up fury. By the time Fred was finished, the once picturesque home was a blood-soaked nightmare, and Fred, now consumed by his madness, fled into the storm. For weeks, Fred eluded capture, hiding deep within the Texan wilderness. He knew the terrain well, and he used that to his advantage. The police scoured the area, but Fred had become like a ghost, vanishing into the dense woods before they could even get close. The search became a nationwide manhunt, with Fred's face plastered across news stations and billboards. The public was terrified this man, a once trusted neighbor, had turned into a cold-blooded killer, and he was still out there somewhere. Finally, after weeks of running, Fred's luck ran out. The police cornered him in an abandoned cabin on the edge of the forest. There, with nowhere left to go, Fred made his last stand. The details of his death are murky. Some say he fought until the bitter end, while others claim he surrendered in silence, exhausted by the weight of his crimes. Either way, Fred's reign of terror was over, but the damage he had done would never be forgotten.
Willow Creek, Oregon is a small town nestled between towering evergreens and rolling mist. The type of place where everyone knows each other, where the days move slowly and the nights are shrouded in silence. It was here on a seemingly ordinary morning that a grim discovery sent shockwaves through the entire community. Laura Jennings, a beloved local school teacher, had gone missing 3 days earlier. Her car was found abandoned near the edge of Birchwood Forest, a place locals avoided after dark. The discovery was made by a hiker who reported the car's peculiar state. A single shoe was left on the passenger seat, the driver's door slightly ajar, and her phone still lying on the dashboard, buzzing with missed calls. The engine was cold, the headlights still faintly flickering. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. As the local police scrambled to begin their search, the news spread like wildfire through Willow Creek. Speculation ran rampant. Had she run away? Was there foul play? Had the forest claimed another victim? Detective Nathan Cross, a seasoned investigator who had recently moved from Portland, was assigned to the case. He was no stranger to mysterious disappearances, but something about this one felt different. The small town's insular nature, its hidden tensions and whispered secrets seemed to mask something far more sinister. Within hours, the police cordoned off the area and began a grid search of Birchwood Forest. Rumors swirled among the search parties. Some claimed the forest was cursed, that people who entered sometimes never came out. Others said they had seen Laura in the days leading up to her disappearance and that she looked different, distracted, frightened even. Detective Cross, standing at the forest's edge, gazed into the dark, looming pines. He felt a chill run down his spine. "This is no ordinary missing persons case," he murmured as the winds whispered through the branches. "This is just the beginning." As the search continued, Cross began speaking to Laura's friends, colleagues, and family. Her husband, Daniel Jennings, was distraught, his eyes red-rimmed from crying. He had reported her missing 2 days ago, but his story seemed rehearsed, his answers too perfect. Cross's instincts kicked in. Was Daniel hiding something, or was it just the grief talking? Cross decided to dig deeper. Laura had been well-liked, known for her warmth and kindness. She was an active member of the community, volunteering at the local shelter and organizing town events. But in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, things had changed. Friends mentioned she had been distant, her smiles less frequent, her eyes clouded with worry. Some hinted at arguments between Laura and Daniel, hushed voices late at night, and a rumor that Laura had confided in a friend about wanting to escape. The deeper Cross delved, the more tangled the web became. Daniel's alibi seemed airtight. He was with his business partner at a charity gala that evening, with plenty of witnesses to back his story. But why did he hesitate when asked about their marriage? And why was Laura's closest friend, Rebecca Carter, so reluctant to speak? Rebecca, a local florist, had been Laura's confidant for years. But when Cross approached her, she was evasive, nervous, her hands trembling as she arranged a bouquet. "I don't know anything, detective," she muttered. She was fine." "Fine?" Cross pressed. She was fine, yet she told another friend she wanted to escape? From what, Rebecca? Rebecca's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and uncertainty, but she said nothing. Cross felt the tension in the air. "What aren't you telling me?" he asked softly, his voice almost a whisper. Just as she opened her mouth to answer, a loud crack echoed through the forest. A gunshot. Cross's blood ran cold. Something, or someone, was watching. The gunshot seemed to change everything. The forest, already an eerie backdrop, became even more menacing. Search efforts intensified as the realization dawned. Whoever was responsible might still be close by. But no one was found. The shot remained a mystery. Back in town, Cross began to uncover troubling information. Laura had been visiting a lawyer, making inquiries about divorce. It seemed Daniel was not the only one keeping secrets. Laura had been planning something big, something drastic. But why? Was she afraid for her life? Meanwhile, Cross received an anonymous letter, slipped under his office door late at night. The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic. "The forest knows. Follow the path to where the shadows end." What did it mean? Who sent it? Cross felt the pull of the forest, the sense that the key to this mystery lay deep within its dark, unyielding depths. As Detective Cross pondered the strange letter, he decided to take a calculated risk. He knew he needed to explore the path mentioned in the note. Gathering a small team, he set out into Birchwood Forest, tracing a route that led deeper into the thick, shadowed woodlands. The air was thick with tension. Every crack of a branch underfoot made his heart pound harder. The trees seemed to close in, their branches intertwining like fingers hiding secrets. After what felt like hours, the team stumbled upon a hidden clearing. There they found an old, dilapidated cabin, its windows boarded up and the front door slightly ajar. Cross's instincts screamed danger, but he knew they had to investigate. As they carefully pushed the door open, they saw remnants of a campfire and scattered papers. On the wall, a large, hastily painted message read, "Truth dies in darkness." Inside the cabin, they found something that would turn the investigation upside down. A set of photographs showing Laura with a man who wasn't Daniel. The man's face was blurred, as if deliberately scratched out, but Laura's expression was one of fear. Who was this man? What did he have to do with her disappearance? Back in Willow Creek, Cross began connecting the dots. He discovered that Laura had been seeing this mysterious man for months, secretly meeting him in places outside of town. More questions arose. Was this man a lover, a blackmailer, or something even more sinister? With the investigation now at a critical juncture, Cross turned his attention back to Rebecca Carter, Laura's closest friend. Rebecca had become increasingly nervous, and Cross suspected she knew more than she was letting on. Pushing harder this time, he confronted her again, armed with the new photos. "Who is he, Rebecca?" "You know, don't you?" Cross demanded. Rebecca's face went pale, and her hands shook as she glanced at the photographs. After a long silence, she finally broke down. "I didn't want to say anything because I was scared," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But yes, I know him. His name is Alex Hartman, and he was obsessed with Laura. But she wanted nothing to do with him. He wouldn't leave her alone, kept following her, threatening her. I think he's dangerous." Cross pressed further. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" Tears filled her eyes. "I thought if I stayed quiet, he would go away. I didn't want to be involved, but now I fear it's too late." What did it mean? Who sent it? Cross felt the pull of the forest, the sense that the key to this mystery lay deep within its dark, unyielding depths. As Detective Cross pondered the strange letter, he decided to take a calculated risk. He knew he needed to explore the path mentioned in the note. Gathering a small team, he set out into Birchwood Forest, tracing a route that led deeper into the thick, shadowed woodlands. The air was thick with tension. Every crack of a branch underfoot made his heart pound harder. The trees seemed to close in, their branches intertwining like fingers hiding secrets. After what felt like hours, the team stumbled upon a hidden clearing. There they found an old, dilapidated cabin, its windows boarded up and the front door slightly ajar. Cross's instincts screamed danger, but he knew they had to investigate. As they carefully pushed the door open, they saw remnants of a campfire and scattered papers. On the wall, a large, hastily painted message read, "Truth dies in darkness." Inside the cabin, they found something that would turn the investigation upside down. A set of photographs showing Laura with a man who wasn't Daniel. The man's face was blurred, as if deliberately scratched out, but Laura's expression was one of fear. Who was this man? What did he have to do with her disappearance? Back in Willow Creek, Cross began connecting the dots. He discovered that Laura had been seeing this mysterious man for months, secretly meeting him in places outside of town. More questions arose. Was this man a lover, a blackmailer, or something even more sinister? With the investigation now at a critical juncture, Cross turned his attention back to Rebecca Carter, Laura's closest friend. Rebecca had become increasingly nervous, and Cross suspected she knew more than she was letting on. Pushing harder this time, he confronted her again, armed with the new photos. "Who is he, Rebecca?" "You know, don't you?" Cross demanded. Rebecca's face went pale, and her hands shook as she glanced at the photographs. After a long silence, she finally broke down. "I didn't want to say anything because I was scared," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But yes, I know him. His name is Alex Hartman, and he was obsessed with Laura. But she wanted nothing to do with him. He wouldn't leave her alone, kept following her, threatening her. I think he's dangerous." Cross pressed further. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" Tears filled her eyes. "I thought if I stayed quiet, he would go away. I didn't want to be involved, but now I fear it's too late." Now with a name to go on, Cross immediately ran a background check on Alex Hartman. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Alex had a history of stalking and violence, with multiple restraining orders filed against him in the past. It seemed he was obsessed with women who had spurned him, and Laura was his latest fixation. Detective Cross was overwhelmed with the intricate web of deceit and mystery that had surrounded Laura's disappearance. Yet he knew there were pieces of the puzzle he hadn't uncovered. Cross revisited the investigation files, focusing on Marlene Cooper and the cult known as the Enlightened Path. The rumors about dark rituals, manipulation, and control haunted his thoughts. The cult had dissolved a decade ago, but what if its influence lingered in shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again? To uncover more, Cross turned to an unexpected source. Deborah Lane, a former cult member who had publicly denounced the group years ago. Deborah was now a reclusive writer known for her cryptic books on secret societies. Convincing Deborah to speak would not be easy, but Cross knew he had to try. When he finally tracked Deborah down to a secluded cabin on the outskirts of a forgotten town, he found a woman haunted by her past. Deborah hesitated, but eventually agreed to talk. "The Enlightened Path was never just a cult," she whispered. "It was a front for something much darker. Laura knew too much, and Marlene, she would do anything to protect her secrets." Cross pressed for more, but Deborah only gave him a cryptic clue. "Follow the money and look for the one who speaks in riddles." Intrigued and somewhat perplexed by Deborah's clue, Detective Cross began tracing the financial transactions that Marlene Cooper had made over the years. A peculiar pattern emerged. Several large payments to an anonymous entity known only as the Raven. The name was odd, enigmatic, and sent chills down Cross's spine. As he dug deeper into this alias, he discovered a series of mysterious online posts and blogs filled with riddles and cryptic messages, each alluding to hidden secrets within Willow Creek. Realizing he needed help, Cross reached out to Agent Kate Miller, a cybercrime specialist with a reputation for tracking elusive online personas. Miller was sharp, efficient, and had a knack for finding needles in digital haystacks. Within hours, she traced the IP address of the Raven's posts back to a rundown internet cafe in a forgotten corner of the city. Cross and Miller decided to visit the cafe together, suspecting it might lead to more clues. When they arrived, they found the cafe deserted, its windows boarded up, and a "for sale" sign hanging loosely from the door. Inside, the place was dark and musty, with graffiti-covered walls and broken furniture scattered about. In the back, they noticed a single laptop sitting on a rickety old table, the screen still faintly glowing. Cross felt a sense of unease, but knew they had to investigate. As they approached, the laptop screen flickered to life, displaying a message. "You're getting closer, detective. But are you ready to pay the price?" Cross's heart raced. Whoever the Raven was, they were watching him, perhaps even now. Miller quickly started analyzing the laptop, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "This is a trap," she muttered, "but we might be able to turn it to our advantage." As she worked, Cross took in the surroundings, his eyes scanning for anything that might give them a clue. He spotted a crumpled piece of paper under a chair, partially hidden. He picked it up and smoothed it out to reveal a hand-drawn map of Birchwood Forest with an X marked near Hollow Lake, the same location referenced in the mysterious cassette tape. It seemed like all roads were leading back to that place. "Looks like our friend wants us to go to Hollow Lake," Cross murmured, showing the map to Miller. "But why?" Miller frowned. "Could be a trap, or it could be exactly where they want us to go to find the next clue. Either way, we have to be prepared for anything." Determined to uncover the truth, Cross and Miller made plans to head to Hollow Lake the next morning. But as they were leaving the cafe, Cross's phone buzzed with a new message. He looked down to see an anonymous text. "Time is running out. The shadows are closing in." Component placement. Undeterred by the ominous message, Cross and Miller drove to Hollow Lake at dawn, their breaths visible in the cool morning air. The area was eerily quiet, the fog hanging low over the water like a shroud. They parked a distance away and approached the lake cautiously, their senses heightened to every sound. Hartman laughs bitterly. "You'll never know," he sneers, "because they control everything in this town. They see everything. They know everything. And they've been watching you, detective, since the moment you arrived." Cross feels a chill run down his spine. "Who are they, Alex? Tell us. Who's pulling the strings?" Hartman's expression flickers with a mix of fear and defiance. He opens his mouth to speak again, but suddenly there's another sound, a sharp crack from the woods behind him. His eyes widen in shock and he collapses forward, dropping his gun, a dart protruding from his neck. Cross and Miller dive for cover, adrenaline surging through their veins. Miller whispers, "Tranquilizer dart." Someone wants him alive. Cross nods, pulling his gun as he scans the tree line. "Stay low," he mutters. "We're not alone." They hear rustling in the bushes, and a shadowy figure emerges, dressed in tactical gear, face obscured by a mask. Cross takes aim, but the figure moves swiftly, disappearing back into the dense foliage. "They're professionals," he mutters. "Someone doesn't want us getting any closer to the truth." Hartman lies on the ground, unconscious but alive. Miller checks his pulse. "He's out cold, but he'll make it," she reports. "We need to get him back to town and figure out who's behind this." Cross agrees. "Let's go, but keep your eyes peeled. I have a feeling this is far from over." Back in Willow Creek, Cross and Miller bring Hartman to the station and have him placed under protective custody. They know they have to act fast. Whoever is behind this won't stop until Hartman is silenced for good. As they delve further into the investigation, Cross begins to suspect that the shadowy group controlling Willow Creek has ties to powerful people in the town. Marlene Cooper, Laura's secret sister, seems to be at the center of it all. But the deeper they dig, the murkier the waters become. They start to notice things: phones tapping, cars following them, strange figures lingering outside their homes. Cross begins to feel the paranoia creeping in. He knows they're being watched and every move they make is being tracked. Meanwhile, Isabel's mother, Margaret Stanton, a powerful woman with deep ties to Willow Creek, becomes a person of interest. Cross overhears a suspicious phone call between her and another unknown party. "Don't let them hurt you, not like last time," Margaret warns. Cross decides to bring Margaret in for questioning. She arrives at the station with an air of confidence, but as soon as she sits down, her demeanor shifts. "I don't know what you're talking about," she says coldly, but Cross pushes her, showing her the photographs and the connection between Marlene and Laura. "You knew, didn't you?" he demands. "You knew what happened all those years ago, and you've been hiding it." Margaret's expression falters for a moment, but she regains her composure. "I've done what I needed to protect my family," she says quietly. "You don't understand the forces at play here, Detective. You have no idea what you're up against." But before Cross can press further, Margaret adds, almost whispering, "Isabel wasn't alone in those woods that day. There was another child, a boy, and he's still missing." Margaret's revelation sends shockwaves through Cross and Miller. They now have more questions than ever. Who was the missing boy and what happened to him? Was he connected to the same people controlling the town? Cross delves deeper into the case of the missing boy who was presumed dead but whose body was never found. As he digs into the town's archives, he finds an old newspaper clipping about a political scandal from decades ago involving a young boy who disappeared, the son of Richard Hayes, a powerful local businessman with deep roots in Willow Creek. Cross realizes that Hayes has enough influence to cover up whatever happened back then. The town begins to buzz with rumors. The residents start connecting the dots between the recent events and the long-forgotten scandal. Isabel finds herself increasingly isolated, caught in a web of suspicion and secrets. Meanwhile, Thomas Miller, the town's eccentric, starts receiving threatening messages warning him to stay silent or face the consequences. Cross knows time is running out. He tracks down Richard Hayes, hoping to confront him. But Hayes, a shrewd and calculating man, denies any knowledge of the missing boy. "I don't know what you're talking about, Detective," he sneers. "That was a long time ago, and some things are better left buried." Cross presses on, determined to uncover the truth, but the more he digs, the more he realizes that he's poking a hornet's nest. As Cross's suspicions grow, he discovers that Richard Hayes, the businessman, had been in contact with Margaret Stanton right before Laura's disappearance. Were they working together to hide something? Cross confronts Margaret again, this time with more evidence. She breaks down, admitting that she was threatened by powerful people to keep quiet about what happened in the forest all those years ago. She hands over a cryptic note she found slipped under her door the night before Laura's murder. "Stay silent, or else..." Cross pieces together that there are at least two forces at play, one trying to bring the truth to light and another doing everything to keep it hidden. He begins to suspect that a second murder may be planned, one that would tie up the remaining loose ends. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Cross decides to reenact the events of the past. He takes Isabel back to the woods, hoping to jog her memory of that fateful day. In the dense, dark woods, things begin to take a sinister turn. Strange noises echo through the trees, and shadows seem to dance between the trunks. Isabel becomes increasingly agitated, insisting that someone is watching them. Cross, too, feels the eyes on him, a sense of being hunted. They come across an old abandoned cabin deep in the forest. Inside, they find remnants of children's toys, a torn teddy bear, and faded newspaper clippings about the missing boy. It seems someone has been here recently, revisiting the past. Miller's voice trembles. "We're closer than ever, Nathan, but I don't like this. I feel like we're walking into a trap." Just as she finishes speaking, they hear a noise outside, a branch snapping. Then a low, growling voice mutters, "You shouldn't have come here." Cross pulls out his gun, turning to face the threat. But there's no one in sight, just the trees swaying in the wind and the shadows growing darker. They decide to leave, but as they step outside, Cross receives a call from the station. The news is grim. Their office has been broken into, and key evidence, including Bates's journal, is missing. Cross realizes that they are being watched and manipulated at every turn. Suddenly, a shot rings out from somewhere deep in the woods. They duck for cover, but Isabel is grazed by a bullet. Cross grabs her and pulls her behind a tree. "We need to move now," he shouts. They race through the forest, hearts pounding, knowing they've stepped into something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. Back in town, Cross decides to confront Richard Hayes directly. He barges into Hayes' office, demanding answers. Hayes, surprisingly calm, tells Cross that he's playing a dangerous game. "You're poking around in places you don't understand," he warns. "There are forces at work here that are far beyond you." Cross, undeterred, threatens to expose everything. But Hayes counters with a chilling offer. "You want the truth, detective? Fine, but it comes with a price. Meet me tonight and I'll tell you everything, but you better be ready for what you're about to learn." As Cross reads through the documents, he realizes he's stepped into a much larger game than he had imagined. The files detail a web of corruption that stretches far beyond Willow Creek, involving politicians, business moguls, and even law enforcement. He now understands that Laura's disappearance, the missing boy, and the dark secrets of the town are all connected by a network of people who would do anything to keep their secrets buried. Hayes watches Cross's reaction carefully. "You see, detective," Hayes begins, his voice calm but edged with menace, "this is not just about a missing woman or a forgotten child. This is about power, who holds it, who loses it, and who is willing to kill for it." Cross, undeterred, stares him down. "You think you can scare me into silence, Richard? You think these files are enough to keep me quiet?" Hayes leans forward, his smile fading. "I don't need to scare you, detective. You're already in too deep. You know too much now. The only choice you have left is to join us or end up like the rest." Cross knows he can't trust Hayes, but he also knows that these files are the key to blowing the whole conspiracy wide open. "I'm not joining you, and I'm not backing down," Cross declares. "I'm taking these files to the public, no matter the cost." Hayes' expression shifts to one of cold calculation. "Then you leave me no choice," he says, standing up. "But know this, detective, there are people watching you who are far more dangerous than me." Part 19. The Turning Point. As Cross leaves the meeting, he immediately senses danger. His instincts tell him that Hayes won't let him get far. He decides to take a different route back to his office, carefully checking for tails or surveillance. But just as he reaches his car, he sees a shadowy figure lurking in the alley. Before he can react, the figure lunges at him, slashing his tires and darting away into the night. Cross realizes he is running out of time. He heads to a safe house where Miller is waiting. "They're onto us," he says, breathless. "We need to get these files out now." But as they prepare to make their next move, Cross's phone rings. It's a distorted voice on the other end. "Detective Cross, you've come too far. Stop now, or you and everyone you care about will pay the price." Miller looks at Cross, fear in her eyes. "What do we do, Nathan?" Cross takes a deep breath. "We go public. We expose them all." But before they can leave, there's a loud crash. The windows shatter as smoke fills the room. An explosion rocks the building, knocking them off their feet. As Cross scrambles to his feet, he realizes they've been targeted. "We're out of time," he yells. "We need to move now." Part 20. The Final Confrontation. Determined to bring everything to light, Cross decides to set a trap of his own. He organizes a fake press conference inviting all the key players, the town's elite, the business moguls, and even Richard Hayes. He knows it's risky, but he also knows it's the only way to force their hand. The day of the press conference arrives. The room is filled with reporters, cameras, and the people of Willow Creek, all buzzing with anticipation. Cross steps up to the podium, his face stern and resolved. "Today," he begins, "we are here to uncover the truth." He presents the files, the evidence of corruption, the confessions, and the connections between Laura's disappearance, the missing boy, and the powerful figures who have been manipulating the town for years. The room erupts into chaos as the crowd gasps and murmurs. But just as he finishes his presentation, a figure steps forward from the shadows, a man no one expected. It's Michael Crane, a high-ranking local businessman who had kept a low profile throughout the investigation. He pulls out a gun and aims it at Cross. "Enough!" Crane shouts. "You think you can destroy everything we've built here? You think you can just expose us and walk away?" Cross, prepared for this, calmly holds up his hands. "Michael, it's over. We have everything we need to bring you down." Crane's hand shakes, his face contorted with rage, but before he can pull the trigger, there's a gunshot from the back of the room. Crane collapses, shot in the shoulder. The shooter steps forward. It's Thomas Miller, the town's eccentric, now holding a smoking gun. "Not today," Thomas says, his voice steady. "Not anymore." The police swarm in, arresting Crane and the others implicated in the files. Cross watches as the network of corruption finally unravels before his eyes. He feels a weight lift from his shoulders. The truth, as twisted and dark as it was, has finally come to light. With the corrupt officials behind bars and the conspiracy exposed, Willow Creek begins to heal. The town is shaken, but there is a sense of relief that justice has been served. Cross stands at the edge of Birchwood Forest, looking out at the place where it all began. He knows that some scars will never fade, but at least now the shadows have been chased away by the light of truth. And as the winds rustle through the trees, he hears the faintest whisper, as if the forest itself is thanking him for setting things right. It was a cold November evening in Albany, New York, the kind of night where the wind seemed to bite through your clothes and the dim streetlights barely cut through the mist that lingered in the air. The city, usually bustling with the hum of daily life, felt eerily quiet. In a suburb just on the edge of the city, hidden among rows of identical houses, something was terribly wrong at 1402 Birchwood Drive. Jessica Collins, a 34-year-old marketing executive, hadn't shown up for work that day. Her absence wasn't unusual by itself. People get sick, things come up, but it was the silence that followed that set off alarms. Jessica was always in contact, her phone glued to her hand, whether she was texting, emailing, or checking social media. But on this particular day, her phone went straight to voicemail. No messages, no activity, nothing. Her best friend, Veronica Hart, tried to stay calm at first. Maybe Jessica was just taking a mental health day. She had been stressed lately, new projects at work, the strain of her long-distance relationship with her fiancé, Ethan Grant. But by the time evening rolled around and no one had heard a word from Jessica, the unease turned into panic. Veronica decided to go check on her. When she pulled up to Jessica's house, the first thing Veronica noticed was that the front door was slightly ajar. Not enough to be immediately alarming, but enough to make her stomach twist with dread. Jessica was meticulous about locking up. She would never leave the door like that. With her heart racing, Veronica stepped inside and immediately felt the weight of silence. The house was dark, too quiet, as if the air itself was holding its breath. "Jess?" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. She moved further inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the curtains. Everything seemed in place. The keys on the kitchen counter, the mail stacked neatly on the table. But there was something off, an unsettling feeling that grew stronger the deeper she went into the house. And then, as she rounded the corner into the living room, she saw it. Jessica's phone lying face down on the floor. The screen was shattered, and next to it a single red-stained shoe. Veronica froze, her brain trying to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. "Jessica!" she called again, louder this time, panic now flooding her veins. Still no answer. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. Within minutes, the street outside was filled with flashing lights. Detective Samuel Ward, a grizzled investigator with the Albany Police Department, arrived on the scene. He'd seen his share of strange cases, but something about this one already felt different. He questioned Veronica, but she was in shock, barely able to get the words out. Ward stepped into the house, his trained eyes scanning the room. He noticed the shattered phone, the shoe, the eerie stillness that hung in the air like a bad omen. Something terrible had happened here. But where was Jessica? As the forensics team combed the house, Ward couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, that the house was hiding more than it was letting on. And he was right. The next day, the investigation intensified. Ethan Grant, Jessica's fiancé, flew in from Los Angeles the moment he got the call. He was frantic, desperate for answers. Ward watched him closely as they sat in the station. Ethan's grief seemed genuine, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something else that Ward couldn't quite place. "We were supposed to get married next spring," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "She was stressed, but we were fine. I don't understand. Who would do this?" Ward leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Ethan's. Was there anyone in her life who might have wanted to hurt her? Anyone who seemed off or who made her uncomfortable recently? Ethan shook his head. "No, Jess was... Everyone loved her. She didn't have enemies. She was strong." Independent Ward wasn't convinced. In his experience, no one was ever as clean-cut as they seemed, and he knew that relationships, especially long-distance ones, were rarely as perfect as people made them out to be. As the days passed, the investigation took one strange turn after another. Veronica admitted that Jessica had been acting strange in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She had been distant, distracted, even paranoid, but she hadn't told anyone why. "She kept saying something wasn't right," Veronica recalled, "but she wouldn't tell me what. Just that she had a bad feeling, like someone was watching her." Ward dug deeper into Jessica's life, and that's when he uncovered the first real crack in the facade. An old friend, Andrew Carlos, who had recently reconnected with Jessica. The two had grown up together in Albany but hadn't spoken in years. And then, out of nowhere, Andrew had come back into her life, sending messages, meeting up for coffee. When Ward questioned Andrew, the man seemed nervous, his answers too rehearsed. He claimed he and Jessica were just catching up, old friends reconnecting. But Ward sensed there was more to the story. And then, when Andrew's alibi for the night Jessica went missing didn't hold up, Ward's suspicions deepened. It wasn't long before the media caught wind of the case. The disappearance of a beautiful, successful woman in a quiet suburban neighborhood? It was the kind of story that captured the public's imagination. Reporters hounded the police for updates, and conspiracy theories began to swirl. But Ward kept his focus. There were too many loose threads, too many unanswered questions. Why had Jessica been so paranoid? Why was her phone shattered? And what was Andrew Carlos really hiding? Then, just when the investigation seemed to hit a wall, a new piece of evidence surfaced. Security footage from a gas station near Jessica's house. The grainy footage showed a car pulling up to her street late the night she disappeared. The driver? None other than Ethan Grant. Ward's pulse quickened as he reviewed the footage. Ethan had claimed he was still in Los Angeles that night. Why had he lied? And why had he been so desperate to get back to Albany? Confronted with the footage, Ethan finally cracked. He admitted that he had flown in to surprise Jessica that night, suspecting that something was going on between her and Andrew. When he arrived at her house, they argued about Andrew, about their relationship, about everything. But then he left. At least, that's what he claimed. "I didn't hurt her," Ethan insisted. "Yes, we fought, but I swear, when I left, she was alive." But Ward wasn't so sure. The timeline didn't add up, and Ethan's increasingly erratic behavior only raised more red flags. And yet, without a body, without more evidence, it was impossible to know for sure. And so the case grew colder, the answers more elusive, the town of Albany gripped by the mystery of what really happened to Jessica Collins. Some believed she had run away, tired of her life and the secrets she kept. Others were convinced she had been the victim of foul play, her body hidden somewhere in the dense woods outside the city. But Detective Samuel Ward wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Because deep down he knew the truth was out there, buried in the lies and half-truths of those closest to Jessica. And he wasn't going to stop until he found it. The mystery of Jessica Collins was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The days turned into weeks, and as winter settled over Albany, the case of Jessica Collins began to fade from the headlines. But Detective Samuel Ward couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. Every night as he reviewed the evidence, her shattered phone, the abandoned car, the fractured relationships, he found himself circling the same question. What was Jessica hiding, and who wanted to make sure she never revealed it? One evening, just as Ward was about to leave the station, a call came in. It was Veronica. Her voice was shaking, barely above a whisper. "You need to come over. I found something." Within minutes, Ward was at Veronica's house. She met him at the door, her face pale, her hands trembling as she held up a small leather-bound journal. "I was cleaning out some of Jessica's things from work," Veronica explained. "I didn't think much of it at first, but then I found this. It's her journal." Ward carefully flipped through the pages, his heart pounding as he read Jessica's private thoughts. The entries started out normal enough, reflections on her day, work stress, and snippets about her relationship with Ethan. But then the tone shifted. She started writing about someone following her. "I think I'm being watched," one entry read. "At first I thought it was just paranoia, but now I'm sure of it. I can feel their eyes on me." Ward's brow furrowed as he continued to read. The entries grew more frantic, more desperate. Jessica had written about strange phone calls, cryptic notes left on her car, and a dark figure she had seen lurking outside her window late at night. But the most chilling part came near the end, just days before she disappeared. "I found out something I wasn't supposed to know. If anything happens to me, it's because of them." Ward's mind raced. Who was them? And what had Jessica discovered?